When she called me the maid, I didn't say a word. I simply looked at her, my hands still wet from washing the dishes, the sponge slowly sliding out of my palm. There were 6 people sitting in my living room that day, all her friends, laughing over glasses of white wine I had poured for them. And in that laughter, I heard something crack inside me. I'd never thought silence could be so loud. 2 years earlier, when my son, Daniel, brought home Emily, I had felt something close to joy, the kind that warms your bones after a long winter. She was polite, charming, all smiles and soft hands. A woman who said please and thank you, and who hugged me the first day we met. "She's the one, Mom," Daniel had told me, a nervous excitement trembling in his voice. "You'll love her." And I did. At first. She reminded me of the young wives I used to see on television. Always well-dressed, speaking fast, laughing easily, the kind of woman who filled a room without trying. I, on the other hand, was quieter, softer. Raised in a world where women didn't show off what they owned, they simply cared for it. When they married, Daniel asked me to move in with them for a few months while they settled into the new house. I'd recently lost my husband, Harold, after 42 years of marriage, and the quiet of my empty home had started to echo. I said yes, not because I wanted to intrude, but because I thought perhaps my hands could still make a home warm for someone. The first few weeks were fine. Emily would sit at the kitchen counter while I cooked, scrolling through her phone, humming along to some song I didn't know. "Smells wonderful, Mom," she'd say, smiling. She called me Mom then. Daniel worked long hours, so it was usually just the two of us in the house. I liked the quiet routine, the soft clatter of dishes, the smell of lemon polish on the dining table, the hum of the dishwasher at night. But something changed after their first anniversary. It wasn't sudden, more like the slow dimming of a light bulb. She started making small comments. "Oh, you still use butter for frying? That's old-fashioned." Or, "You don't have to clean the guest room, Mrs. Parker. The cleaner comes on Thursdays." Mrs. Parker. She stopped calling me Mom. I told myself it was nothing. I'd heard my friends complain about their daughters-in-law, how they could be proud or distant. I thought Emily was just adjusting, maybe feeling like she needed more space. So I stepped back. I spent more time in the garden, trimming the rose bushes Harold had planted for me years ago. Emily rarely came outside. She said she didn't like bugs. Daniel still treated me with love. He'd stop by the kitchen for coffee before work, kiss me on the cheek, tell me, "Don't mind Em, Mom. She's just stressed with her job." And I didn't mind. Not then. One Sunday afternoon, Emily told me she was hosting a brunch for her colleagues. A small get-together, she said. I offered to help, of course. Cooking was my language of love. She agreed, though her tone was clipped. "Sure, if you really want to." I woke up early that day, made fresh bread, set the table with the good china, polished the silverware. I even arranged lilies, her favorite, in a crystal vase. By noon, the house was buzzing. Music played softly, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and I moved quietly around the kitchen, wiping, refilling, keeping things perfect. When her guests arrived, I greeted them warmly. "Oh, you must be Emily's mother?" one of them said. Emily laughed, a high, sharp sound. "Oh, no," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "That's not my mother. That's our maid. She just helps around the house." For a moment, the world tilted. I looked at her, at the sparkle of her earrings, the lazy confidence in her tone, the faint smirk tugging at her lips. She didn't look back. She just reached for a champagne flute and said, "Would you mind topping these up, please?" My throat burned. I heard someone murmur, "Oh, how lucky to have help." and another laugh followed. I wanted to leave. My hands shook as I took the bottle, pouring carefully so the bubbles didn't spill over. Every sound was too sharp. The pop of corks, the scrape of heels, the click of ice in glass. When Daniel came home that evening, I didn't tell him. I just said, "Your wife's brunch went well." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and went upstairs to shower. But something inside me, something gentle, hardened that day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, her voice, the laughter, the way she looked at me like I was invisible. I thought about Harold and how he used to say, "Respect isn't given by money, Mary. It's given by heart." I wondered what he'd think if he'd seen me standing there, humiliated in the home I helped build. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to shout or cry or beg for an apology. No, I was going to teach Emily something she'd never forget. And I knew exactly how. The next weekend, Daniel told me Emily was hosting another dinner, this one for her in-laws. She wants it to be perfect, he said. "Can you help, Mom? You know how to make everything right." I smiled. "Of course, darling. I'll handle dessert." Because there was one thing Emily feared. One dessert she couldn't stand. Not because it tasted bad, but because of what it reminded her of. I'd once overheard her on the phone, crying to a friend, saying she'd gotten sick on that dessert as a child, that her mother had made her eat it while guests laughed. It had embarrassed her for years. She hated it so much that she'd banned it from the house. That's what I decided to serve. That week, I planned everything quietly. Emily spent most of her time at work, unaware of what I was preparing. I shopped alone, cooked alone, thought alone. But my mind was calm. Too calm. Not with anger, but with purpose. I didn't want to humiliate her the way she did me. I just wanted her to feel what it was like, even for one moment, to be looked at differently. When Saturday came, the table gleamed again. The air was sweet with roasted rosemary chicken, garlic bread, and wine. But in the fridge, hidden on the second shelf, sat the dessert, perfectly chilled, covered in foil. Rice pudding. The morning of the dinner, the house was full of that tense kind of calm that always comes before company. I could hear Emily's heels clicking across the floor upstairs, her voice rising and falling in irritation as she spoke on the phone. I was in the kitchen, wearing my old blue apron, whisking the cream slowly so it held soft peaks. The scent of cinnamon and cardamom lingered in the air. Familiar. Comforting. It reminded me of the days I'd make rice pudding for Harold when we had guests, back when laughter filled the house without effort. I was setting the pudding to chill when Emily walked in. She was dressed perfectly, hair pinned, silk blouse, a diamond pendant that caught the light every time she moved. She stopped at the doorway and looked at the bowls lined up on the counter. "What's that smell?" she asked, frowning. "Just dessert," I said, not looking up. "Something simple and sweet." She stepped closer, squinting. "That better not be what I think it is." I smiled faintly. "What do you think it is, dear?" Her lips tightened. "Rice pudding. I told you I hate that stuff." I wiped my hands on a towel and turned to her. "Oh, don't worry, Emily. It's not for you. It's just a family favorite from Daniel's childhood. I thought his parents might appreciate a taste of home." Her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but something sharper. Fear, maybe. "Well," she said, her voice sharp as a knife's edge, "just don't serve it to me. And make sure the presentation is nice. We don't want anything looking old-fashioned." She left before I could answer, her perfume trailing behind her like a statement. Floral, cold, expensive. As I cleaned up, I felt something tug in my chest. Guilt, maybe? I wasn't trying to be cruel, but some lessons needed gentleness, others needed truth. All afternoon, I kept busy, chopping vegetables, marinating the chicken, folding napkins into perfect triangles. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind wandered. I thought of Daniel as a boy, how he'd sit at the table while I cooked, telling me about his dreams of becoming a doctor, how proud I'd been when he achieved them, how much I'd wanted his wife to love him the way I loved his father. Steady, kind, without ego. But Emily didn't seem to understand that love wasn't about status, it was about respect. By 6 o'clock, the house was spotless. Candles flickered on the table, music played softly in the background, and the wine was chilled just enough to catch the frost on the glasses. I heard Daniel's voice upstairs, laughing. Emily's tone followed, light, rehearsed. They made a good pair, at least in appearance. The doorbell rang just before 7. Daniel's father-in-law and mother-in-law arrived first, polite, neatly dressed people with stiff smiles. Then came Emily's older sister and her husband, both dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Mrs. Parker, what a lovely home you have," her mother said as she handed me a bouquet. "Thank you," I said, taking the flowers. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." I noticed Emily didn't introduce me. She only smiled that same sharp smile and said, "Dinner will be served soon. I've made sure everything is perfect." I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. During dinner, I mostly stayed quiet, refilling glasses, bringing out plates. The conversation was smooth, shallow even, about vacations, investments, promotions. Emily was in her element. Once her sister complimented the chicken. "This is divine," she said. "Em, you really outdid yourself." Emily smiled, lifting her glass. "Thank you. I wanted everything to feel professional." Daniel caught my eye from across the table. He smiled faintly, that small, private smile of his that used to mean, "I see you, Mom." But now I wasn't sure if he still did. When the plates were cleared, I took a deep breath. My heart beat steady but strong. "Would anyone like dessert?" I asked. Emily opened her mouth, probably to decline, but her father spoke first. "Of course, I could use something sweet after that delicious meal." I nodded. "Wonderful. It's a family recipe. I hope you'll enjoy it." I went into the kitchen, uncovered the bowls one by one. The pudding was perfect. Thick, creamy, flecked with cinnamon, topped with roasted almonds and a touch of nutmeg. The smell was heavenly. I arranged the bowls on a silver tray and carried them out carefully, setting one in front of each guest. When I placed one in front of Emily, her eyes widened just slightly. Her fork froze halfway to her plate. "Oh," I said softly. I remembered how Daniel used to love this when he was little. I couldn't resist. The others had already started eating. Compliments filled the air. "This is wonderful. So creamy. What a lovely old-fashioned dessert." Emily sat there, her hands stiff in her lap, color draining from her face. Her mother looked at her. "What's wrong, dear?" Emily's lips trembled. I'm fine." I smiled gently. "Oh, I'm so glad. You see, I wasn't sure if I should make it. You once mentioned a bad experience." The table went quiet. Her sister looked at her curiously. "What experience?" Emily's jaw clenched. "Nothing. It's just a silly childhood story." Her father chuckled. "Well, you should share it. Sounds funny." Emily looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it, the recognition. She knew. She knew I remembered that story, the one she'd cried about on the phone. I met her gaze calmly and said, "Sometimes the things we dislike most are the ones that remind us where we come from." For the first time since she moved into that house, she had nothing to say. When dessert ended, everyone praised the meal. They thanked me this time, not her. "Mrs. Parker, you're a marvelous cook," her mother said warmly. "Thank you," I replied, glancing at Emily. "I just do what I can to help around the house." A soft, knowing silence filled the room. Even Daniel looked uneasy, not because he understood what had happened, but because he felt it. By the time the guests left, Emily's mask was cracking. Her words were clipped, her eyes hard. She didn't yell, not yet, but I could tell she wanted to. That night, I sat in my room, hands folded in my lap, the faint hum of the refrigerator still carrying the smell of cinnamon through the house. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, but for the first time in months, I felt seen. Still, something told me the story wasn't over. The next morning, the silence in the house felt heavy, the kind of silence that holds its breath, waiting for something to break it. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, reading the paper like always, when I heard her footsteps. Slow, controlled, dangerous. Emily walked in, wearing her robe, her hair perfectly brushed. Even in anger, she never let herself look uncomposed. She stood by the counter, looking at me for a long time before speaking. "What exactly was that last night?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. I folded the paper neatly. "Dinner," I said, "and dessert. Don't play games with me, Margaret." She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "You knew what you were doing." I took a slow sip of tea. "If you mean remembering a story my daughter-in-law once told me about a bowl of rice pudding she swore would choke her, then yes, I suppose I did." Her face flushed. "That was cruel." "Cruel?" I echoed softly. "I didn't call anyone a maid in front of company." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. She looked away. "You're overreacting. I was joking." I let out a small breath. When you say something cruel and call it a joke, it doesn't make it less cruel. It only shows you think cruelty is funny. Her hands trembled slightly, just enough for me to notice. "You embarrassed me," she whispered, "in front of my family." I stood then, my chair scraping gently against the floor. "No, Emily, you embarrassed yourself. You just didn't expect anyone to notice." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked between us, each second sharp and deliberate. Then she said, "You think you can teach me a lesson? You think that's your place?" I met her eyes. "It's not my place to teach, but it is my right to be treated with respect in my own home." She scoffed. "Your home? This is our house now, Margaret. You're just living here because Daniel doesn't want to hurt your feelings." The words landed like cold water. I looked at her, studying the smug tilt of her chin, the confidence that came not from kindness, but from possession. "So that's how you see it," I said quietly. "You believe this house, this family, belongs to you." She smiled, almost pitying. "It does now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the faint sound of laughter coming from their room, a forced, artificial laugh that didn't reach Daniel's heart. I stared at the ceiling, memories of my late husband washing over me. Harold had built this house with his own hands, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. He'd said once, "This home will always belong to love, not pride." But now, pride had made itself comfortable under this roof. A few days passed. Emily didn't speak to me much, but I noticed her watching me. When I watered the plants, she glanced from the kitchen window. When I took out the trash, she peeked from behind the curtain. Like she expected me to strike again. And maybe part of me wanted to. But revenge was never the point. Dignity was. Still, it was Daniel who finally broke the silence. He came home early from work one evening, jacket slung over his shoulder, exhaustion written all over his face. "Mom," he said, setting down his bag, "can we talk?" "Of course." He sat across from me at the table, the same table where I'd fed him soup when he had colds as a boy, the same table where we celebrated every birthday. "I don't know what's going on between you and Emily," he began, rubbing his forehead. "But she's upset. Says you embarrassed her." I nodded slowly. "She's not wrong. I embarrassed her, but I didn't humiliate her. There's a difference." He frowned. Mom, I raised a hand gently. Daniel, do you remember the first time you brought her home? The way she looked at me? He hesitated. She was nervous. She was judging, I corrected softly. And that's fine. We all judge what we don't understand. But she crossed a line when she tried to erase me from this home. He looked down, conflicted. You're making it sound worse than it is. Am I? I asked. Tell me honestly, when was the last time she cooked a meal that wasn't for her own guests? When was the last time she asked how your day was before talking about herself? He didn't answer. I leaned forward, my voice steady but gentle. I raised you to be kind, Daniel, not blind. Kindness isn't the same as silence. He met my eyes then, the way he used to when he was a child, caught between guilt and realization. I just want peace, he said quietly. So do I replied. But peace without respect is just quiet control. He didn't say another word, but that night I heard raised voices behind their door, muffled but unmistakable. The next morning, Emily's eyes were red when she came downstairs. She didn't look at me. She just grabbed her purse and left without a word. Daniel left later, slower. He paused at the door. You were right, he said softly. She shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I nodded, saying nothing. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. Days passed like that, distant, tense, almost polite, until one afternoon when I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I was in the garden, trimming the roses by the side of the house. The kitchen window was open. Emily was inside, talking to someone on the phone. Her voice was sharp, low, urgent. I don't care what Daniel thinks, she said. She's not staying here much longer. Once the new account goes through, I'll have enough to convince him we need our own place. He's too soft to say no to me. There was a pause. Then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh. Yes, of course he'll believe me. He always does. I stood there, the pruning shears frozen in my hand. The scent of roses mixed with something metallic in my mouth. Disbelief, maybe even hurt. She wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from my son's life entirely. And she was planning something to make it happen. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there for a long while, listening to the wind move through the garden. That same garden Harold had planted for me 40 years ago. Then I whispered, so that's how it's going to be. And for the first time, I began to plan. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. There comes a time in life when you stop asking why people betray you and instead start asking what you're going to do about it. Emily had made one mistake. She thought kindness meant weakness. She thought silence meant surrender. She was about to learn that an old woman's quiet is not submission, it's strategy. The next morning, I cooked breakfast like nothing had happened. Pancakes, bacon, and the smell of coffee drifting through the air. Emily walked in, still scrolling on her phone, pretending I wasn't there. Good morning, I said cheerfully. She didn't reply. She poured herself a glass of juice and sat down. I smiled. Daniel mentioned you're handling the new family accounts. She froze, just for a heartbeat, before recovering. Yes, I'm organizing our finances. You know, helping him be more responsible. Ah, I nodded. How thoughtful. Harold used to say that whoever controls the accounts controls the house. She looked up sharply. Excuse me? I waved it off with a chuckle. Oh, just an old saying. But I saw it, that flicker of suspicion in her eyes, the one that always betrayed her. That afternoon, I went into town. Everyone there still knew me by name, the grocer, the postman, even the bank manager, Mr. Lewis. He'd known our family for decades. He smiled when he saw me. "Margaret, it's been too long." "It has," I said, returning the smile. "I actually came to ask a small favor." I explained, simply and politely, that I wanted to insure my husband's estate, the home, the savings, the small trust fund we'd left for Daniel, remained legally protected. He frowned slightly. "Did something happen?" "Just making sure everything stays in the family," I said. By evening, every account that bore my husband's name or mine had been verified, frozen for review, and documented for transfer protection. Emily couldn't touch a cent, not legally, not quietly. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, sipping wine and scrolling through her phone again. "Where have you been all day?" she asked, not even looking up. "Oh, here and there," I said with a smile. "Took care of a few things at the bank." That got her attention. She lowered her glass. "The bank?" "Yes." I realized how complicated accounts can get when families start blending. She stared at me. "You didn't touch anything that belongs to Daniel, did you?" "Of course not," I said sweetly. "I only made sure what belonged to me and Harold stays where it should." Her jaw tightened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted softly. "You see, Emily, there's a difference between our house and my home. You live here, yes, but this place, its roots, its memories, its foundation, they were built before you ever arrived, and I won't let you bury them." Her face went pale. The next few days were tense. She barely spoke to me, and Daniel seemed caught in the middle, the poor boy trying to make peace between two women who were already waging silent war. But the final blow came not from me, it came from her own hand. One evening, Daniel came home early again. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you know anything about a transfer request Emily made?" I looked up from my knitting. "Transfer?" He nodded. "She tried to move money from one of Dad's old accounts, the one with your name still on it. The bank flagged it as unauthorized." I said nothing. I didn't have to. He continued, his voice shaking slightly. "They called me to confirm. When I asked her about it, she said it was for a renovation project, but the form listed a private account under her name." He sat down, running a hand through his hair. "I don't understand. Why would she do that?" I wanted to comfort him, to tell him he didn't need to understand everything to act. But I also knew some lessons have to be lived, not taught. So instead, I said quietly, "Sometimes people don't steal money, Daniel. They steal peace. They take your trust, and when they break it, they leave you bankrupt in spirit." He didn't speak for a while. Then, finally, "I think I need to spend some time at my sister's place, alone." Emily was furious when she found out. I heard the shouting, the pleading, the tears. She came to my room that night, her voice trembling. "You turned him against me." I looked up from my chair. "No, Emily, you did that yourself." She glared at me. "You'll regret this. When he comes back, you'll be the one packing." I smiled softly. "If he comes back to you and he's truly happy, then I'll help you pack my things myself." She didn't know what to do with that kind of calm. Rage doesn't know how to fight peace. Weeks passed. Daniel stayed with his sister. Emily grew quieter, more restless. She spent hours on her phone, but the calls grew shorter, colder. And then, one morning, she was gone. No goodbye, no note. Just a half-empty closet and a faint scent of her perfume in the hallway. Daniel came home a few days later, holding a letter. She'd left it for him. In it, she said she needed space, that things had gotten too complicated. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. He folded the letter and put it away without a word. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said, "You were right, Mom. You always were." I shook my head gently. "No, Daniel, I wasn't right. I was just patient." Later that evening, as I stood in the garden, I watched the wind move through the roses again, the same ones I'd trimmed the day I overheard her. It struck me how life circles back, how pain prunes us but also makes room for new growth. I whispered to the night air, "Harold, I kept our home safe." And for the first time in months, I felt peace settle in the corners of the house again. Not because I'd won, but because I hadn't let cruelty change who I was. People think revenge is loud, fire, fury, destruction. But real revenge is quiet. It's the kind that comes from standing your ground without lowering your soul. And sometimes the best revenge isn't making them pay. It's showing them you never needed their approval to live in peace. A few months passed after Emily left. The house was quieter now, but not in the way that silence used to ache. It was a restful quiet, the kind that feels earned. The clatter of dishes, the smell of morning coffee, the creak of the floorboards, all of it belonged to me again. The walls no longer echoed with tension, only with peace. Daniel visited often. At first, he came quietly, hesitant, careful, as if stepping through a house of ghosts. But each time, he stayed longer. We began to talk again, really talk. One evening, while I was tending to the garden, he joined me. The late spring air carried the scent of jasmine. He stood there for a while, watching me trim the roses. "You still take care of them," he said softly. I smiled. "They've been through a lot. A few thorns don't scare me anymore." He chuckled, the first time I'd heard him laugh in what felt like forever. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive her." I looked at him, my son, the boy who once built tree houses and chased frogs by the creek. He looked older now, wearier, but wiser too. "Forgiveness isn't to gift for her," I said quietly. "It's one for yourself. It doesn't mean you let her back in. It means you stop letting her live rent-free in your heart." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You always make things sound so simple, Mom." I smiled faintly. "That's because I've had more time to learn the hard way." After that, we fell into a new rhythm. He started spending weekends at home, helping with repairs, mowing the lawn, even cooking dinner sometimes. His father's recipes, clumsy but heartfelt. We talked about everything, the past, the future, even the small things we'd never had time for before. One afternoon, he mentioned a new colleague at work. "She's kind," he said shyly. "Reminds me of you, actually. Quiet, but strong." I didn't say much, just smiled, watching the way his eyes softened when he spoke of her. It wasn't love yet, but it was something. Something honest, unhurried. The kind of healing that doesn't rush. But one evening, something unexpected happened. I was cleaning out an old cabinet in the living room when I found a box. Dusty, untouched. Inside were photos, letters, and a few things I'd tucked away long ago. Among them was a note in Emily's handwriting. It wasn't addressed to me. It was something she'd written to herself, perhaps a letter she never meant to send. The paper was creased, the ink slightly faded. It read, "Sometimes I wish I could be the kind of woman people forgive easily, but I wasn't raised to ask for forgiveness. I was raised to survive. Maybe that's my curse. Maybe that's why I can't love people who are kind, conniving." But reading those lines, I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't strong, she was scared. And every cruel word, every cruel act, it came from that fear. Fear of being small, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the box. I didn't tell Daniel. It wasn't his burden to carry. That night, I whispered a prayer, not of forgiveness, but of release. For her, for me, for all the words left unsaid. Time moved gently after that. I started teaching at the community center again, cooking classes for widows and retirees. It felt good to share, to laugh, to listen to other women's stories of heartbreak and endurance. We were all survivors in our own ways, quiet warriors wearing aprons instead of armor. One afternoon, as we baked together, one of the women asked, "Margaret, how do you stay so calm, even after everything you've been through?" I thought for a moment and said, "Because I finally learned that dignity doesn't come from how people treat you. It comes from how you choose to respond." She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. Months later, Daniel came to visit with someone new, the colleague he'd mentioned. Her name was Claire. She was gentle, polite, with a warmth that filled the room without trying to. When she spoke, she looked you in the eyes, really looked. After dinner, as we washed dishes together, she said quietly, "Daniel told me what happened. You must be such a strong woman." I smiled. "No, dear, I just decided to not be a bitter one." She laughed softly, and I could tell she understood. That night after they left, I sat by the window and looked out into the garden. The roses were blooming again, brighter than ever. And I realized something simple, something I wish I'd known years earlier. Sometimes life tests us not to show our weakness, but to remind us of our strength. We can't control how others treat us, but we can control the story that comes after. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments below. And remember, sometimes silence speaks louder than anger.